best. And this afternoon, we are focusing on one big number, which is Ghana's energy sector legacy debt. And as you always know, Winston Tackie is on my left, joining me on the smart wall for analysis, and Caleb Ziblim. Guys, I mean, this is one headline that many was talking about during the weekend and even during this week as well, which is Ghana's energy sector debt. And it all came about when the government released that press statement saying that they had cleared Ghana's energy sector debt. I mean, what we want to do this afternoon is try to make people understand the status of the energy sector debt in terms of the restructuring. What is the status? How much have we cleared? And what is still outstanding? So, I mean, this is a big number on the wall. 3.7 billion Ghana cedis, US dollars, is Ghana's current energy sector legacy debt. But I know we've had a number of restructuring. What do we know so far about this big figure, Caleb?
So this was, remember somewhere last year, the finance minister, when he was introducing the additional 1 cedi extra. So that's when, right now the pumps, we pay extra 1 cedi. That's for 4 purchases, mainly for 4 purchases. And then after some time, they use that to clear the legacy debt. So when he was introducing this 1 cedi extra levy, he told us that the energy sector debt at that time, that was at March 2025, was $3.1 billion. So the energy sector debt was $3.1 billion as of March 2025. But in addition to the $3.1 billion, he also said that there was a World Bank guarantee that the previous administration had, exhausted, and that was about 590, almost $600 million. So if you add the $600 million to the $3.1 billion, that's about $3.7 billion that the government owes in total energy sector debt. So the entire energy sector was owing $3.7 billion. That was as of March 2025, so March last year. And then we know we'll come on to how that was reduced and all of that. But then last year, March 2025, they had $3.1 billion in legacy debt and almost $600 million in the World Bank guarantee. So that's $3.7 billion. For the
this is a big figure, and you understand the stories behind how we even came to this point, the restructuring we've done so far, the intervention this current government have actually brought on board to bring this figure now. What do we know so far in terms of how we got to this status and why many say Ghana's energy sector is a debt-making machine?
Interesting enough, over the years we've been assessing the performance in the energy sector, and one very interesting narrative that runs through all this assessment has to do with, number one, rising debt and shortfalls in the energy sector. Consistently, due to the negotiations that we went into with the independent power producers, the kinds of benefits of the merits that basically went against us, because there are certain terms, conditions that does not guarantee the sustainability, which basically when the currency becomes to fall, we begin having current challenge, because most of the agreements were done in dollars. So those times the Ghana cedi was performing badly, and anytime the calculation comes by, we tend to pay more because of the differential. And that shortfall became a key burden every year in every budget for quite some time now. Another important conversation that has come to light is insufficient gas supply from not just the West African gas pipeline, but our domestic supply. We've not been able to meet the demand because our thermal plants across the country were mostly on fuel, and that has become a key conversation in the 2026 budget, where government is trying as much as possible to ensure there's huge investment in the energy sector, and there's a plan to bring about 1,200 cubic meters of gas into stream in 2026, and there's already plans underway to ensure that is fulfilled. And these are very critical assets that needs to down to ensure that these electricity challenges are resolved prudently. But we're also looking at inefficiencies in the energy sector. We know there are several parts of the country where, when we talk about supply constraint, it is still being experienced in some parts of the country, not just in the north. Until recently, when there's been cases where they've sent some thermal plant in Kumasi. Just the last 2 days, we saw the plan is to ensure there's consistent supply of power, not just in the town, but in the villages around, and also including some parts of the eastern corridors. And these are key development in the sector. But this may not necessarily be some of the key issues, but they are thriving challenges that has to do with governance and efficient monitoring of the sector. So you wonder what is different under this government compared to the previous government. We'll come to the numbers. Every year, we keep hearing ECG being subvented by government, interventions coming through for them, in terms of ensuring they're able to supply power. And every time they keep complaining that when it comes to operational costs, they tend to spend more compared to generation cases. But one thing we'll ask, if you are buying a product and you know your customer base, why do you sell and still have shortfall? It's just about you being the distributor. But if you look at the value chain, there are still constraints which will be dealing in the course of the program.
Over the weekend, this was a big number that was actually announced, and there have been so many, misleading headlines around this particular big figure we see on the smartphone, which is that 1.47 billion that the government claimed they paid in 2025 to players in the energy sector. I want you to help us break this down in terms of what really constitutes this almost 1.5 billion US dollars. Is it the entire energy sector debt that has been cleared, or we still have an outstanding amount? And even with this figure, what really constitutes it to make that 1.47 billion?
So when we started, we said the total energy sector debt as of March 2025 was $3.7 billion. So if the government pays 1.4 billion, there's no way it has cleared the debt.
Exactly.
Because if you take out 1.4 from 3.7, there's still so much to pay. I think it's even less than 50%, about 46% or so. So the government has not cleared the entire energy sector debt. But I think maybe the way the finance ministry framed the announcement was a bit misleading. Because if you have $3.1 billion in total energy sector debt, as announced by the finance ministry in March 2025, there's no way a 1.5 billion payment will clear that debt. And also this is legacy debt. So legacy debt is debt that has racked up, not the monthly bills that come. So if you are paying your monthly bills, you still have to pay some debts that you piled up in the past. So from the 1.5 billion, again, remember that I told you that there's almost 600 million guarantee from the World Bank, for I think gas suppliers from ENI and some other players. So the finance ministry has filled that guarantee again. The guarantee was there for in case of shortfalls, you can't pay for it. The government will go into this and take some money out and pay. Because these are private players and very big players in the international market. And you want to make them happy. So if you have a World Bank guarantee set aside for emergencies, you'll be happy and supply gas.
Yeah, you don't want any high-level arbitrations and all of that.
So good news is we filled that guarantee again. So it's back there in case of any other crisis, we can fall on this again. So that has been filled, $597 million. Then again, we have the outstanding invoices again from some of these gas and fuel suppliers, about $480 million. And then the IPP legacy debts, about $393 million. So this is what makes up the almost $1.5 billion payment in 2025. And again, these are your legacy payments. So, and we'll get to that shortly. Every month, we still pay invoices from the IPPs, from fuel suppliers and all of that. So once we are on time with these payments, and we are clearing up the legacy debts, it should mean that in the next few years, we can clear the entire energy sector debts, because right now it's less than $2 billion to clear. So if you are on time with your bills, if ECG is bringing in consistent monthly revenues, and you are consistently paying those you owe, it means you're not piling up more debts every month. And once you're not piling up more debts, it means that you can clear your legacy debts more quickly.
I remember the finance minister made a very emphatic statement when he was reading the budget that if you look at the energy sector, for the first time in a long time, we are not added up any new form of arrears to what we already owed. And in fact, we need to rather, sort of help you understand this, because one thing that a lot of people are asking is this actually new? Is this novel, right? But we can boldly tell you that if you look at what government announced, one thing that we can tell you that is new has to do with the part that Caleb mentioned, the restoration of the World Bank guarantee of $597 million. This is a big deal, and in fact, this is a good step for the country, because with this new form of, should I say, cushion for investors who would want to come in, we can now bring in new investors who would want to come into the energy sector, especially those who want to go into the renewable space, because now you have the World Bank guarantee restored.
And because, in fact, if you look at the last few months of the cash support payment, that's I think September and October, we started paying some solar suppliers as part of the legacy players. So it means that we are actually bringing on board more renewable source of energy.
And if I remember, the renewable side was one of the promises that the president made as far as the energy sector was concerned, that there were steps. They were making steps to make sure that they switch from the heavily dependence on thermal and then hydro and bring in renewal. So the restoration of the World Bank guarantee, for me, is a big deal and the novel thing about this announcement. But when it comes to payment of outstanding invoices to fuel suppliers, I don't think that is new, because in 2024, we saw a total amount of about $775 million that was paid to fuel suppliers. If you look at the legacy debt paid to IPPs, for me, I think that this is about $93 million. 2024, their total amount paid was more than $395, right?
Yes.
Somewhere around $395 million. The key question is, this restoration of the World Bank guarantee, how helpful is it going how helpful would it be to the energy sector as far as our power is concerned? Because now we have stable power. The assurance is that, well, we are going to follow through with the commitment we have with the power players. But this restoration, do you think that it will bring any form of new investors? And if they come in, is it still going to be the take-or-pay arrangement?
It's going to be interesting. Now, this is going to bring a new dynamics in terms of energy negotiation. Right now, government has a footing. Previously, we did not have a footing. So anytime it's just the negotiation comes off, the one who is providing determines or calls the shot. But at the moment, government can decide based on the structure that we are leveraging on these withdrawals from the World Bank is going to give us a very strong footing going forward. And this will open the door for foreign investment into our energy sector. If you look at key development, Fitch is projecting that our energy consumption is going to increase in 2025, 2026, into 2028. Already the Sub-Saharan Africa, Ghana is playing a key role. We've been able to beat our target. And when we talk about sustainability, Ghana has been there. For the last 1 year, we've been able to have sustained power supply. One key thing, because we've seen transformation in the West African gas pipeline, their structure going forward. And I heard the energy minister reiterating consistently that he wonders what is happening in Nigeria. So far as you're meeting your market demand, you certainly ensure you have sustainable supply until when they are doing some works on their gas pipeline, which has been happening for quite some time now. So with the promise of having another gas plant in Ghana, from not just the 10 and some of the Jubilee fields coming on board in 2026, this opens up the sector for new and fresh investment, not just from the private sector, but basically multilateral companies who decide to combine their assets and resources to ensure the infrastructure that is needed to ensure this power as supply, this energy as supplied is something that can be done in 2026. And this should not just be talks, and we want to see it reflect. If government wants to sustain its key development from economy, all the fundamental has been achieved. If the risks of inconsistent power supply is felt in 2026, it's had a tendency to decrepit from businesses. People will go for loans. They're not able to make sales to meet their target, especially those who are into huge time investment. The 24-hour economy, government is talking about building up industrial parks. All these big dreams are not going to get anywhere if our energy security is still at risk.
That's why I think that this was you made an important point about the 24-hour economy, because if the 24-hour economy will work, you need your energy sector to stand on a good footing or on a good wheels. And for government to pay that huge amount of money should tell you that we should expect new investors to come in. We want to move to the era of electric vehicles. We want to produce, power for people to be able to charge their cars and all of that. We need all of those things. But I want us to talk about this aspect of our energy sector or our power industry, where we currently have in our system or in our books independent power producers who produce thermal power. And we've said it here over and over again that if you look at the significance of independent power producers, they produce about 70% of the power that we consume in this country. So for them not to be happy, if they are happy, it's good for the energy sector. If they are not, you see doom so very soon. But government has done something that I think that will be very important going forward. And yesterday Monday, we saw a statement from IPP saying that, well, they are satisfied with the new arrangement because the previous administration had tried to bring this IPP's debt through restructuring to a lower level. That, well, let's sit at the negotiation table and talk about reworking the debts, accept some level of haircuts, but they didn't. What we understand is that in 2025, the Mahama administration, they were able to sit with the independent power producers And the IPP's debt of $1.4 billion that they inherited, they were able to renegotiate it to about 1.1 billion, US dollars, and government was able to enjoy some level of haircut, which is about 250 million, dollars. The key question I want to ask is, IPPs seem to be very happy at the moment because one, your legacy debts are being paid and being paid in a well-structured manner. Secondly, cash waterfall mechanism is also in a very good hands. ECG is playing their parts of the bargain. But we all know that one big indicator in here, or the big brother in here, has to do with exchange rates. The fact that exchange rate is stable, ECG can go ahead and meet their part of the bargain. How important, or how would the story change or the picture change if we see the exchange rate go in a different direction? How will this affect already the arrangement with how the IPPs and even the performance of the cash waterfall kid?
I think when we get to how much we are paying IPPs, the trend, we have a trend of that in Ghana cities. You see that earlier in the administration, the government was paying a little bit more in city terms. But then when the city began, the next one, let's put the next one. But when the city becomes, the last one, when the city becomes relative, when the city, so somewhere around here. Yeah. So you can see in the early parts of the year, we're paying a lot more to the IPPs. But then when the exchange rate became more favorable, it dropped a bit and it leveled off for some time before rising again. So once your exchange is doing very well, it means that ECG, even though they take almost the same monthly revenue every month, they don't need more CDs to convert to dollars and then go and pay the IPPs. Because your current, if you manage to sustain your revenue generation for some time, or your revenue mobilization for a sustained period of time, it means that you don't need to be dipping into the same amount of money and paying IPPs the same amount of dollars. Because once you are paying them, say, 10 CDs every month, and the exchange rate does poorly in a certain month, it means they have to go and pay more, maybe 15 CDs or even 20 CDs. Yeah. And the rest of the money left for the other players in the sector, VRA, ECG, BUI, and the others, they suffer because IPPs are priority.
Level B players.
IPPs and then the poor suppliers are priority. They are level A. Yeah. So whatever ECG collects in a certain month, they take their payments first, and whatever I left behind is what the other players in the sector, shit scramble for. Yeah. So if the exchange rate is doing very well and is very stable, and ECG, very important, ECG also manages to sustain how much they are collecting every single month, then the sector should be managed properly. Because once you have these two factors in check, especially the exchange rate, because if ECG collects $2 billion, 2 billion CDs this month, and then at the end of the month, the exchange rate goes from 10 to 15, it means almost 50% more payments you are giving to them. And then the rest of the CDs you collected, you have to spread it very thinly among the other players in the sector. So the exchange rate is very important in this. And also, once you see the exchange rate being very stable almost the past few months, you can see that this directly impacted in the energy sector. Because once your exchange rate is doing favorably, you can pay IPPs on time. Exactly. You have excess cash to pay the other grid coal, VRA. We've not had much of.
You can actually buy fuel.
You can actually buy fuel. Yeah. And then you also have the 1 CD extra levy, which is supposed to be used for fuel purchases. So ECG this time, if they manage to maintain the revenue they are keeping, the central bank and the finance ministry also manages to sustain or maintain the exchange rate. I think there should be some level of stability moving forward.
Of course, I mean, after the restructuring of all the haircuts, IPP said that, well, we are ready to do burden sharing. We are writing off over $250 million of the debts you owe us. So the outstanding $1.1 billion, let's have an arrangement. And the arrangement is that government has promised them that within the period of 4 to 5 years, and according to the finance minister, by 2028, IPP's legacy debts of $1.1 billion will be paid in full. And we've already paid $393 million in 2025. And in 2026, Winston, we are, let's say, projected to pay $345 million US dollars to IPPs as part of the negotiations we've had with them as payment of their legacy debt. Combining paying legacy debts with meeting requirements of the cash waterfall mechanism, how difficult will it be this year, especially looking at the fact that we are resuming a significant part of our debt repayment this year? We'll be paying Eurobonds, we'll be paying so many things, and even looking at the fact that the IMF will also be exiting this year. How do we juggle the two and make sure that IPPs are happy?
One of the key questions that was asked the finance minister is when he presented the budget last year, is looking at the revenue and the constraints that the economy had previously and the limited scope, especially when it comes to the tax reform. Many were saying government may lose out because of giving more money out to ordinary Ghanaians and letting go of the revenue shortfall. And he emphasized that the key compliance, but if you go down south, you realize that most of the companies that are state-owned enterprises, the CEOs have been given stringent targets, and these targets and revenue target to meet, including the GRA itself. And all these activities are meant to scope in more revenue to increase government. So I believe going into the rest of the year, especially the debt or the IPPs, is going to be quite difficult, not just difficult in terms of ability to pay, but government has already expressed commitment. Commitment, and sustaining that commitment is very important, unless there is an external shock from the West African gas pipeline. But with the plans going forward in the budget for 2026, if government is able to get the funding, we have major capex expenditures to handle in 2026 from the road big push, including key development. But with that, it's going to be quite constrained. But if the fiscal discipline and consolidation going forward is something government can rely on.
Now, Caleb, Winston made an important point, which is, big hurdles ahead, especially for capital expenditure. But we also know that even though government is collecting additional 1 cedi levy on the export price of fuel, they are still left with huge amounts to be paid in terms of energy sector shortfall. What's the burden looking like this year and other years to come?
Well, even this year, the energy sector shortfall looks very good compared to previous years.
Yes.
Because if you look at the trend, I think from 2022, that's when the Ministry of Finance actually pulled out the line item because it was significant. If you look from 2022 to 2025, we were climbing every single year. Started from 5.2 billion to 8 to 18 billion, then 29, almost $30 billion. And for shortfall, it means that ECG, or the revenue generated through the entire energy sector chain, is not enough to meet the bills. So the government will have to come in and then pay some of the bills for you. So that's what the shortfall means. And then we're doing 29 billion in 2025. That's significant. And this year we've dropped that.
Even with the appreciation of the cedi?
Even with the appreciation of the cedi. And we've now dropped that for 2026 to about $15 billion. That's the first time we have seen a drop, if you look at the trend. That's the first time. So it means that in 2025, even though we still pay significantly, there was some level of restructuring the sector that has made this reduction possible. And the 2026 is a projection. Hopefully, when the actual payments come, it will reduce more. Because once you have ECG, not doing some other activities, and also you have the city performing very well, it means that revenue generated can't sustain the bills. And once that happens, the energy sector shortfall should not be too much. If you can go to the next slide, you can see that we are comparing the shortfalls to other various allocations. And just look at this, the shortfall for 2026, how much government is going to pay, it's more than the allocation to the Interior and Defense Ministries. Interior and Defense, we have 12 and 10 billion Ghana cedis. What the shortfall is 15 billion. So the entire energy sector shortfall can run a ministry.
It's actually more than half of Interior and Defense component.
And we're doing 29 in 2025. So 29 would have put us above health. That's how significant the energy sector shortfall is. And also that's why the IMF and the World Bank always make noise about energy sector, because that can destroy the economy. If you don't manage it very well, it can destroy the entire economy. And once the energy sector falls, manufacturing, everything just goes off.
And the interesting aspect is that if government does not prioritize dealing with this issue from a structural point of view, sometimes we go into a lot of contracts that have gone into with these IPPs, and key question is how much is government getting, and there are certain terms that need to be renegotiated. We looked at, but in as much as we are looking at the whole energy sector, that one thing that we shouldn't forget in this conversation is the privatization of the energy sector, which has become key conversation just this week, where the workers in the industry are demanding that that particular suggestion should be called off. But the fact is, if you go back into history, checking the historical performance of ECG, look from trends of ECG's monthly revenue. In 2024 alone, the revenue increased from 920 million to 970 million. Over to March 2025, we've seen it increase from the billion. So if you watch from January 2025 to as of now, October 2025, we have been in the billions of Ghana cedis. Predominantly, one will attribute it to better performance from the basically the city performing well, but that is also another conversation. One, two will say efficiency in the delivery of services. One will also attribute it to possibly the governance structure in ECG has been changed. don't forget, we always say ECG is a formidable profit-making entity, but the key challenge over the years always has been the governance structure. Yeah. Since the change of government in 2025, the numbers are telling you a very interesting story. And that we incited in 2025 during most of our analysis that until that particular loophole is changed, because all has to do with compliance. It's a structured industry that does not need a lot of technicalities. Once one plug is removed, it affects the whole tenet. So what we've seen in 2025 performance of ECG is how it's supposed to be. You pick power, you sell, you record your profits. Yeah. But one thing that we should hope to see is huge investment to ensure there's efficient delivery, and the payback should reflect what has been sold.
Yeah. Well, so over the years, one thing we've noticed that tariffs haven't actually solved our problems, especially in the energy sector. And this particular chart, in fact, is the reason why President John Dramani Mahama has said that, well, I am giving my votes and giving a green light for you to go ahead with the privatization of some aspects of the distribution of ECG. Yeah. Because he sees these numbers and he compares how much we are paying for energy sector shortfalls to how much he's spending on health and education and possibly on roads and defense and interior. The president would have to think around the box and say, outside the box, and say that, how do we even solve this challenge? We've managed to bring on board the additional levy on the export price of fuel, which is estimated to generate more than 8 billion Ghana cedis this year. How else do we solve this problem, especially looking at ECG's revenue, for instance? If you look at ECG's revenue, one thing you see is that their declarations under the cash waterfall mechanism has actually improved. But we all know that that's actually subject to how the city will also perform. If the city begins to misbehave, ECG, just like the former MD said, if we declare everything, the company will go down. So, everything now depends on how ECG is run. And the workers are saying that, well, we've looked at the current numbers. We are doing well. Why do you want to change the winning team? Do you still think that looking at these numbers that ECG declared under the cash waterfall mechanism, it will still be prudent for us to still go ahead with the privatization of the distribution chain of ECG?
Well, I think before this year, ECG was not fully declaring how much they made to the cash waterfall mechanism, which is why we are seeing this improvement. So if you adjust for how much ECG was, let's say, hiding from the cash waterfall mechanism, it's almost the same thing. Yeah. The only difference now is that ECG is fully declaring the entire revenue to the cash waterfall mechanism. So I say not too much has changed revenue-wise, because previously and now it's almost the same revenue, just that ECG is now declaring everything to the committee. So I think the participation is still necessary, because generally nothing significantly has changed within the ECG. And if you hear from the government, they've set their mind, they are going to do it. They said they are going to now speak with the energy committee and all that, but they are going to do it. So I think just now find a way to move forward and not push back too much.
Well, so you have said it, the energy sector is still a big bane and a big hurdle for this particular government. The second stanza of President John Dramani Mahama, and for the 24-hour economy to be on a good wheel, you need the energy sector to also stand well. And in fact, we've showed you where we are in terms of the debt we owe independent power producers, over $700 million US. But we also know that for this to actually work, you need ECG to be on the same trajectory and to follow up with a cash waterfall mechanism. So we can confirm that in terms of our energy sector, we still owe some debt, but the World Bank guarantee has been restored, and that is significant to the health of the energy sector going forward. This has been Beyond the Numbers. With me, Kofi, I did this with
Winston, Tackie,
and
Ziblim.